friends, and welcome to part 5 of the Gateway Experience. If you haven't been here before, I highly recommend that you watch parts 1 through 4 by clicking this link here, as there are lots of terms and concepts that I talk about in this video that I've already explained in previous videos. It's me from 1 week into the future since this video has been filmed. I just wanted to thank you guys so much. My videos have been topping each other every single week. My subscriber count has also doubled. That's because of you guys, so thank you so much for sticking with me, and I hope you enjoy part 5 of the Gateway program. Again, if you're new here, I'm Zayna, and this is Zayna Breaks Stuff. Let's continue with section 19, intervening dimensions. Since the absolute is conscious energy and infinity, it has no boundaries and spans pretty much every dimension, including ours in the physical world. In fact, the absolute overlays everything, as do many of the dimensions as they travel from their own homes to the state of infinity. Basically, every dimension travels through every other dimension as it goes from its origin location to infinity. To enter these intervening dimensions, you would have to focus so intensely that your brainwave output moves so fast that the frequency pattern, if displayed, would look like a solid line. This achievement of altered consciousness sets the stage for perception of non-time-space dimensions because of the physics principle known as Planck's distance. Two things with that. The first is that these non-time-space dimensions that I'm talking about are the previously mentioned intervening dimensions, and Planck's distance, which is also known as Planck's length, was developed by Nobel Prize-winning German theoretical physicist Max Planck. Any oscillating frequency, such as a brainwave, has 2 points of rest at the topmost and bottommost boundaries of a single oscillation. These points act as boundaries for the energy between them, allowing for the energy to change speed, form, direction, etc. between the 2 points. However, for an infinitesimally brief moment at each of these rest points, energy clicks out of the time-space dimension and enters infinity. This critical moment outside of time-space occurs when the brain wave's oscillation drops to below 10 to the negative 33rd centimeters per second, aka Planck's distance. To quote Bentov, quantum mechanics tells us that when distance drops below Planck's distance, again 10 to the negative 33rd centimeters per second, we enter, in fact, a new world. For reference, check out the quantum realm scene in Ant-Man and the Wasp that I've linked below. It gives a good visual of what Bentov is talking about. Returning to the point of all this, the human consciousness wave pattern reaches such a high frequency that the clickouts come so close together that they're virtually continual, meaning it's almost as if the individual is constantly clicking out and always staying in the absolute. Then a portion of that consciousness is postulated to establish and maintain its informational collection function in those dimensions located between time, space, and the absolute. Basically, part of the consciousness decides to maintain and collect information on the intervening dimensions while in this virtually continual absolute state. This allows them a view into time-space. So with its hemisync technique, the Gateway program is designed, if used systematically and patiently, to enable higher consciousness to access the dimensions where Planck's distance applies. This holds true both when consciousness is within the body or remote viewing, which again is a concept that we covered earlier in this paper, and another one that will be coming up down the line. The next section is section 20, subatomic particles. Apparently they're a really good example of clicking out. When subatomic particles collide, their energy fields become entrained or in sync, allowing the particles to communicate. This communication is induced when they're in the clicking out phase of their energy field's oscillation and happens at a time-space velocity that's faster than light. Dr. John Gleedman, who wrote an article for Science Digest, for those of you inclined to Google it, tells us that quantum theory postulates a kind of Siamese twin effect when two subatomic particles collide and then continue on their way. Even when the particles are halfway across the universe from each other, they instantly respond to each other's actions, and in so doing, violate relativity's ban on faster than light velocities. This basically says that quantum theory states that after two subatomic particles collide, they're forever linked like Siamese twins. If one does something, the other one will always react to it. This violates Einstein's theory of relativity that only particles with a resting mass of 0 can travel at the speed of light. But as Bentov says, there are physicists working on a hypothetical particle known as a tachyon. Tachyon speed ranges from higher than the speed of light to infinite infinite velocities. And if you feel like you've heard this term before, it's probably because you've watched The Flash. Wayne McDonnell, who, as a reminder, is the author of this paper, goes on to say, now that we have postulated the legitimacy of the assertion that the energy forms which compose consciousness can move beyond the time-space dimension, we need to turn our attention to the energy forms which inhabit those dimensions between time, space, and the absolute. Saying in doing so, we may better perceive the form that reality assumes when we encounter it in those dimensions. If you all can recall way back in part 1 or 2, I mentioned a being that was watching over people's bodies while their consciousness was gone. So yeah, we're finally talking about that creeper. On this, Bentov says, the causal relationship between events breaks down. Movements become jerky rather than smooth, and time-space may become grainy or chunky. Perhaps a piece of space can be traversed by a particle of matter in any direction without necessarily being synchronized with a piece of time. In short, a pair of events will occur in either time or space, the pair not being connected casually, but by random fluctuation. Okay, so when I read that, I had no idea what it meant or what its purpose was, but basically what Bentov is saying is that inside the time-space dimension, the two concepts generally have a pretty uniform and proportional relationship. A certain space can be covered by energy moving in either particle or waveform at a certain time and assuming a certain velocity, basically anywhere in the time-space dimension. Basically, in the time-space dimension, time, space, and velocity are completely predictable and boring. However, in the intermediate dimensions between time, space, and the absolute, the concept of oscillating motion or energy is not as predictable or uniform as in our physical universe. Because the limitations that exist in our physical universe do not exist in these intermediate dimensions, you're more likely to run into a number of distortions and incongruities regarding the relationship between time and space. But more importantly, when you leave the time-space dimension, access to the future and the past becomes possible. Okay, so far we've learned that we're holograms, the universe is a hologram, there's dimensions outside of time-space, and through Gateway we can somehow access the future and the past, and basically time travel, which is super cool. The next section is section number 22, Special Statuses Out-of-Body Experiences. I'm really excited about this section, but I'm even more excited about what comes after it, which is the missing page number 25. While I won't be talking about that next week, I will be talking about it in the finale in 2 weeks of the Gateway experience. Also, since we are approaching the end of this series, there's only 2 episodes left, I just wanted to put my feelers out there and see if there was anything that you guys wanted me to talk about next, since I'm on the lookout for my next series. So let me know in the comments if there's anything, and again, thank you so much for staying with me. So stick around and I'll see you next week for part 6 of the Gateway program.